everyone, thank you for tuning in. I'm your instructor Joy. Thank you very much for your continued support with your kind words, comments, questions, and sending me donations here, and also on my Patreon page, booking lessons with me, and also volunteering with your time. I really appreciate. So in this video, we're going to talk about how to choose the right violin. This topic has been requested many times and it keeps coming back, and I thought, well, I will just make a video. I believe I already made several videos about that, but this video will be more summarizing all those important points so that we know, so that we pick the right violin that meant for us. If you need a little more personal help with that, I also offer personal coaching when it comes to violin shopping. If you're interested, you can send me an email to topiaviolins@gmail.com, which you can find in the description below. Now, first, when it comes to choosing the correct violin, the right violin, first comes to the size. You have to know what size is a proper size for yourself or for your children or for your student. Now, there are many ways of measuring, but basically it has to do with the length of your arm. Yeah, so the way you measure is you hold your violin the way you would normally play it comfortably. Straighten your arm all the way. So when you straighten your arm, you should be able to curve your hand around the scroll like that. Yeah, if you can come about a 3/4, so about until here, like this would be ideal. At least a minimum size that should be. So when you do that, you should not straighten your arm too rigidly, but somewhat comfortably, like that, and you should be able to curve your hand around the scroll like this. If you can come up around a 3/4 until something like that, that would be ideal, or larger. So if I did it with my full-size violin, I got well over, because full-size violin is normally good from around 11 years old to adult, unless this violin has a particularly shorter arm and etc. But when it comes to young violinists, to children, I personally prefer my young violin students to have a little larger violin, then that's perfectly fit. For the same reason, just the way when we buy clothes for the little ones, we don't buy that fits perfectly in the moment, but we buy a little larger one so they can use it for at least a couple of years, for that same reason. And also, I find it's not a bad idea for the students to learn how to stretch a bit earlier, because that's a big part of the playing the violin as well. Yeah. So now, second, should we get an old violin or should we get a new violin? We know that well-made old violins go for higher values, for hundreds, thousands, for millions of dollars. We've heard of a violin name called Stradivarius, Guadagnini, and so on. Violin, name goes on and on. Those are several hundred years old European violins, mainly Italian, some French, and some German as well. Me as a violinist, not as an investor. As a violinist, I see violin as a tool which will help me to play violin well, to express my musical ideas. So whatever tool that makes my job easier, that's a good violin for me. So you have to know whether you're seeing the violin as an investment or as a tool like I do. The reason why I'm saying as an investment is because there are people who buy old violins, even though they're not violins themselves, but it keeps the value very well, and also the value goes up as it ages when it's well-made violin, especially when you have a big name violin such as Stradivarius, Guadagnini, Violin, etc. That even goes. There are copies of it, actually tons of copies of that. So it's very hard to know the authenticity of the violin, even though there are many documents there. So when it comes to such an old instrument, make sure you have proper documented papers along with the violin. Yeah, there's certificates, and there are a lot of again, certificates not given from the seller, but from the well-known, respected names. If you're interested, I can also make video about that one. So now, cons and pros. Pros for the old violin, keeps the value very well. I'm going to show you. This is one of, I have several violins. This is my old Italian violin. As you can see, it looks gorgeous. It's got, you know, you can see it has nice aging, things like that. They will become. When it comes to modern violin, even though they're trying, that's another my violin, they're trying to make it as though it's an old violin by putting these artificial marks and stuff like that and dents, but it has a little shinier look, yeah? So old violin, oopsie, versus new violin, right? And the modern violin not always keeps a value well. It could, but it's not the same way the old violin would keep it. However, the cons would be an old violin, just like anything, when it ages, it goes bad, it needs repaired. Same thing goes with the violin. As you can see, when you see, you can see a little part that you can see a little, it's not a crack, but it was cracked at some point, it was repaired. And there are things like that because, you know, it's got through many hundreds of years. So let's see, there's another part, there was a little crack, or they were opening, they didn't open it clean way, so there's a little glued mark, things like that you will see. So when you're seeing old violin like that, there's something that you have to be very careful. Make sure that every part are well glued. There's no huge crack. If there's crack, make sure that's well sealed from the underneath. In that case, you might have to get a professional help or learn how to see inside well and things like that, yeah? And sometimes when it comes to old violin, the scrolls are not always the original part that was often replaced, which is not a huge deal, but make sure it's all cleared on the documents, things like that. When it comes to modern violin, you don't have to worry about such thing. The violin is pretty much recently made, so it's a great top shape, rarely any cracks or no dents unless they're meant for a little beauty or characteristic. And then all parts are working well, it's fairly new, that would be gone. Now, next point, we're wondering whether we should rent or purchase a violin. There are two reasons to rent. Because the violin is new to the violin playing and not sure whether it's going to be a long term or not, so you just want to try it out, then it would be a good idea to rent. Or you're shopping for very, very high value violin and you don't want to invest several $1,000 right away, and you want to try it out different violins, and that's another reason people sometimes rent. Now in North America here, I haven't found any dealer who would do that knowingly, even though in Germany there are some dealers who let you rent very high value violin. Of course, there's a forms of deposit and privately agreed upon, and I had friends who would rent certain instruments for 6 months or 3 months and so on to give concerts, to get an idea and get familiar with the instrument, see if this is gonna be your violin or not. So there are certain services, some parts of the world, and there would be another reason for you to rent a violin. Other than that, I personally prefer to purchase the violin because I find it takes time for us to really learn how to handle the violin well. Even though 6 months seems to be quite long, I find it, when I got this, my new French violin, it took me about over a year and 3 months, something like that, completely understanding how to make this violin work for me and so that I can work with it as well. So if you purchase it, you can also not only spend enough time to get used to it and work with it, also you can work on a little better setup that works for you, such as the height of the bridge, the curve of the bridge, and you can test different strings that works well with the instrument and also with your type of playing. Yeah, so that's something that you have to know whether it works for you or not. Next one that I often get asked was so-and-so brand name of the violin, is it good, or brand name so-and-so is better than so-and-so brand name. I personally don't go after brand name or location of the violin was made. I solemnly go for the quality of the violin and the sound of the violin. For two reasons. First, authenticity of what the brand name says, to me it's a little vague, but what the instrument actually plays is something that's a signature that cannot be faked, that cannot be hidden. So that's a very secure way to choose a violin. So I don't go by brand name, but however, what I do go by is make sure first check the structure, whether it's well made or not, such as, so was it all part well glued, because there are several parts that are glued together. And then make sure the peg fits nice and tightly, which means when I tune it, of course sometimes you have to press it a bit, that happens, but make sure when you tune it, the peg stays without slipping back. Sometimes when the violin is new to violin playing and he or she does not know how to push it properly, and therefore it slips, that happens too. But the structure wise, the peg should fit really tightly in the peg hole, so that when you turn actually and then push it properly, it should stay, so without slipping back. And then the action is another thing, the distance between the string and the fingerboard. So if this is too high, which means we have to press finger harder, and that can be difficult, especially if you have to go higher position, because the action gets greater than here, right? So make those setups, all those, even though such setups can be redone, but if it's made properly, it's even better. So it's basic structure things. And then also when I would like to test the violin myself, or if I can't be there, I make sure that my prospective clients or my students are there playing for me, and I ask them to play specific things, such as, does a violin play easily? Does bow speak easily? So make sure it plays easily and it speaks easily without much work. Violin playing itself is hard enough. Make sure the instrument works with you, not against you. Another thing, make sure it balances well. G, D, A, E. It should sound somewhat similar. So you should, sometimes we hear certain string all of a sudden loud, all of muted, all of a sudden muted. That's something to be avoided. So make sure each string speaks well, unless you have a specific sound expectation. Some people prefer certain strings speak stronger or softer. That's a different story, but in general, you want to have an instrument that has a balanced sound, meaning every string sounds somewhat even. And at last, my last point is take your time, right? So when we are shopping for a new violin, we're so excited, we're trying certain violins, and then by the time we try violin number 4, violin number 5, we're realizing it's harder than we thought. I don't know which one I like, I can't remember anymore, which is normal, but you have to understand. Just like, you know, when you're looking for a partner, for a lifelong partner, you don't just go a place and pick one day. Take your time. I find it a minimum of couple months is a good amount to explore different violins. I personally take more than that, but do take your time, do a little research, play the violins yourself, and if possible, video record, audio record, listen yourself, and see if you can play the same violin at different holes, and then if you can, and take it home, and then try to imagine whether this could be your lifelong partner or not. Yeah, whichever violin you pick, there's always reason to take a little more time so that you make the right choice. Yeah, I hope this video was helpful. Thank you for watching and hope to see you again. Bye bye.